Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Literary as Feck. Good?
Terrifyingly good.
Okay, all right.
And that reminds me, that was perfect. Now we'll switch to gallery mode. I forgot to do that. There we go.
Okay.
Is it gone to gallery, your end?
It's I've got both of us on the screen at the same time.
Yeah, there we go.
The whole time. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you know what's funny? I have no idea why we're doing this book. In that, like, I don't remember when I first heard about the Flashman books. I know that we were talking about them, and we both already knew about them, but I don't know why I knew about the Flashman books. I have a feeling I stumbled across like a download on Pirate Bay or something, and I read the description of like the thing, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting."
Yes,
and I just downloaded them.
Yes, and well done for outing yourself as a criminal there.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well,
and of course,
I'm Irish.
I don't know what you're talking about, but yes,
okay.
I also know at the same time exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
I think I might have, not just like a shitty, like not just like here's some fucking text of these books, like a deluxe.
Yes.
Of with all beautiful, images of all the covers and yes, I know what you mean. But of course, I didn't download them because I
no. You went and bought the books individually from a bookshop in the high street.
Actually, I paid extra to make up for your theft. I paid.
Yes, well, thank you. So yeah. So I mean, I'm not coming to this as any kind of an expert in the works of George MacDonald Fraser or the Flashman books. But I think the first time we talked about it, you had brought up the idea that you thought that the character of Flashheart in Blackadder was probably a nod towards Flashman. And after having now read the first book and a half, it definitely seems that that's...
Yes. We'll talk about that a little bit later because there's slight differences. And also the other one, by chance, so last episode we did a little shout out to Justin Marriott and his recent Battling Britons all review special of old British war comics. And while that's been sitting in my because it's like capsule reviews, right? So it's difficult to read all in one sitting. So that's become my new toilet book.
Nice.
That's what I read when I'm taking a dump. And I happened across a review of something actually I didn't know anything about. Are you familiar with the Cadman comics?
No, I have never heard of Cadman. So
Cadman was, I think, in either Victor or Hotspur.
Okay.
If you remember those. They're slightly ahead of our time, but...
but no, yes.
Yeah. So Cadman seems to basically be a First World War version of Flashman.
Okay, interesting.
Kind of a cowardly character who runs away from, but people think he's the hero.
Okay.
And he has like a Batman who is the only person who actually knows the truth about him, and he's actually I suppose the same way they tried to do. What's the iteration of Sherlock Holmes where Sherlock Holmes is an idiot?
And right. Watson's the genius.
Yeah. Is it one of the movies? Maybe like...
Yeah, it's definitely a film, but I can't remember whose version.
Right. A Study in Terror, maybe. Okay. Which one it was, but I'm not making that up, right? There is a version.
No, there definitely is, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, the same kind of thing. So the hero is actually his sidekick, and but he's taking all the glory.
It's Without a Clue.
Okay.
With Michael Caine and James Mason, maybe.
Okay.
That doesn't sound...
I don't think I've ever seen it.
No,
but for whatever reason, when I was reading a lot of Sherlock Holmes at one point, I remember reading about that.
Right. Yeah, because I think it's in that Michael Caine being in a film no longer being a reason to watch it, period, rather than...
Yes. Which is, actually, it's just great. Before we even get into the book, there's two last little connections that are kind of interesting. So, you know, the last book we read,
Hmm.
the one that was made into the movie Ashanti.
Yes.
So the script doctor for the movie Ashanti was George MacDonald Fraser,
Indeed it was. Yeah. Yeah.
which is interesting. And it also starred Michael Caine,
Right.
at very much not his best.
Yeah, I'm wondering as well if Michael Caine might, I don't know. Michael Caine has I like Michael Caine a lot, but he does have a somewhat limited range, and I can't really ever recall him playing cowardly. But in terms of just physical description, he would have been a pretty good screen Flashman, I think.
Yes.
Better
Yes.
maybe than Malcolm Mcdowell, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Going around this ass backwards. So tell
Okay.
us a
Yes.
bit more about the character of Flashman, because this is the book you chose to talk about this.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I mentioned last time when we were talking about, I wanted to call it the wrong name there. Ibano. Okay.
Ibano,
So when we were reading that, I was kind of saying that, you know, a few things came up, like the East India Company, the legacy of British colonialism, slavery, all of those kinds of things. And I think I mentioned that I was excited about reading Flashman because I had a feeling that they took a more nuanced view, maybe, of like British adventurism, kind of in that period, right? And
right.
like, and I think that comes through really strong. And it's funny because I've read since then that apparently George MacDonald Fraser was increasingly kind of a right-wing guy in his later life. And yet it's hard to tell in a way because the book is so rigorous in some ways in making its main character be a scumbag and surrounded by epic failing kind of military stupidity and bungling.
Right.
So anyway, I guess we'll go back. So the character of Flashman is taken from a book I've never read. Have you ever read Tom Brown's School Days?
No. It's
okay. I mean, all right.
It's one of those things I can't really ever imagine
wanting to read.
Yeah, but then again, might kind of be quite entertaining. I mean, it's so out of my wheelhouse,
right?
But also, I unfairly probably feel as if I know exactly what it's going to be.
Okay.
And it might not read like that. Like anytime, like I don't know what the fuck the difference between that and Billy Bunter. They're all the same thing to me.
Right. I've always loved the idea of
a down, or you know.
Right. I've always loved the idea of a tuck shop, though. When I was a kid and would ever read about a tuck shop, I was like,
I actually do have experience of a tuck shop.
Okay.
Our school didn't have a tuck shop, but in the summer holidays we'd go sometimes to Pendine, which was like a seaside, like I guess a summer camp for kids. You'd go there for a week or something.
A Butlins-y kind of a place.
Not quite that classy. Like
okay, if Butlins is classy, then
yeah, we didn't like entertainment in the we might have had like a disco or something, but it was more like nature trails, a spot of abseiling that kind of, you know, being able to identify gull shit and, you know, stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, by taste.
Yeah, and in the early evenings, the tuck shop would open like at, I can't remember, like 5 p.m. or something, and it was like and
you'd buy 5 pies, right, stacked on top of each other.
Well, it was like well, I didn't eat as many pies in those days as I clearly do now, but it was like a rush for like, the tuck shop is open. In so much, and I'm not making this up, one day we'd all run into it. It was like a communal sleeping area, you know, and everyone would rush to get their, you know, little purse or wallet or whatever to go to the tuck shop and buy some sweets, you know. One kid, I remember, like slid across the, you know, the polished floor and broke his leg on the frame of his, I'm not making this up, broke his leg on the iron frame of his bed and actually had to be winched out of the window and put into an ambulance.
Oh my God. Because he was trying to get to the tuck shop.
Yeah. It was the highlight of our day, right?
Okay. So anyway, and this guy got trampled in the process of attempting to rush to the tuck shop. Awesome. So anyway, I have not read Tom Brown's School Days, but in it apparently the character of Tom Brown is unmercifully bullied by this character called Flashman, and so George MacDonald Fraser imagined what the school bully would be like, and I guess in the book he is expelled from this rugby boys' school for drunkenness. So George MacDonald's Fraser's book kind of begins with sort of reiterating that part of Tom Brown's School Days, I guess, the part where he gets expelled.
I suppose we then mentioned Tom Brown's School Days is like a book from like 1857 as well, right? So
yes, whereas this is from 1969, I think, the first.
Right.
Yeah, the first of the Flashman books. So yeah, it's considerably later on, a revisionist.
Yeah, well, it's I guess the timeline is, so if he's checked out of rugby school that's a school in rugby as opposed to rugby.
Yes.
Although it could be,
yes,
it's a very rugga-bugga kind of environment, right? So yeah, if he's kicked out in 1857, so he's born, the character's like born 1840s, and then the conceit of the Flashman papers, as it's called, the 11-volume run or whatever, is that he's writing his memoirs towards the end of his life, I guess.
Yes, he's in his 80s,
of the 20th century. Yeah.
Yes.
And then they were locked in a tea chest or something, and then uncovered 50 years later in the 60s. Yeah. And then they tried to suppress them, right? Because they're full of the truth of what the Victorian era was really like, right?
Yes, yeah. And I think, one of the things that you have to give to George MacDonald Fraser is how well researched the books appear to have been.
Yes.
And they do come with like notes at the end on the historical facts and the historical personages in the book, which again lends them this idea that they seem, and apparently they were mistaken by particularly gullible Americans as being actual works of history, or like actual memoir.
For example, I'm just looking at the notes here. One of the notes I made to myself for future reading is Lieutenant General Colin Mackenzie has left one of the most vivid accounts of the First Afghan War in Storms and Sunshine of a Soldier's Life, 1884. So yeah, that's gone on my reading list, like a first-hand account of the First Afghan War. That's got to be worth reading.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I have to say, I'm not bringing a great deal of historical knowledge to my reading of the book. A lot of this stuff I was kind of reading about for the first time in some ways.
Yes.
What little I know about the first Afghan War, and it may not even be the first, it could be the second, is the fact that, getting back to Sherlock Holmes, that Watson has just returned from the Afghan War, and that's where his kind of, it wasn't called PTSD, but he's clearly suffering from some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder in that first book, and his relationship with Sherlock is what gets him through it. So, he might have run into Flashman, possibly.
Yes, he might be the source of his PTSD.
His PTSD, exactly. So Flashman basically ends up then quite quickly after being kicked out of school, and then his father has a pretty jaundiced view of his son, and kind of, I can't remember, does he join the military on his own, like that's his own volition?
Yes.
Or he does? Yeah.
He particularly wants, I should have written this, I knew I should have done this. He particularly wants to join, there's a particular regiment, isn't there?
Okay.
He wants to join, like a kind of the Brigadiers or Scots Guard or something, isn't there? Because they have a good reputation. And more than that, he knows they've just come back from foreign.
They're not going to be deployed anytime soon. Yes. Because his streak of cowardice is one of the main. Right. That and his obsessive kind of womanizing and
his father as well is kind of portrayed a little bit like, I couldn't help thinking of in the movie Killigilla, Peter O'Toole plays like Tiberius, right, as a kind of syphilis-ridden
yes.
of him. I was kind of had that in mind. This kind of jowly dude, like a bulbous nose, and
yes, definitely. Oh yeah, he's definitely a pretty dissolute. He's just an older version of the same.
Yeah,
and then maybe that's why he is disgusted by Flashman,
right?
His son, because he's no different than he is. Because at one point, doesn't Flashman attempt to seduce his own and successfully seduce his dad's
mother?
Not quite stepmother, but like mistress, basically.
Yes, his mother's wench.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, the first book is quite episodic, I think, which makes sense. It does have the feeling of a kind of a diary.
It's episodic and also repetitive, like the number of times, like, he comes this close to death, passes out, and then wakes up and hello, here, it's like,
yes.
But that said, I mean, I don't think we need to go into too much, but basically across the whole series, I guess he's a Zelig-like figure who pops up at all the important kind of battles, or all the important historical
Bighorn. He's involved in the slave trade in the U.S. Right. He's in China. Yeah, he's everywhere where the British Empire is up to no good, getting up to no good.
And in this case, he's basically he's in India for a little bit, and then he ends up in Afghanistan. Yeah, and then
through no wish of his own. That part of the problem is because he increasingly gets his reputation as being a kind of a heroic figure, despite the fact that he's not at all. It puts him in situations where he's then pushed into further and further, having to. He gets sent off, and I think that's a running joke in the books that his reputation as a hero means he's constantly forced to face danger, which he doesn't want to do.
Because he's considered this hero of the empire, right, and fearless kind of defender of the Queen's honor, I guess, or whatever. Yeah. But what's interesting is I we'll get to later the film version. When I was looking at the trivia at the IMDb, it's interesting. I'd totally forgotten about this because I hadn't seen this film in years and years and years and years. But I remember liking it back in the day, and it came out the same year as the Flashman film. Is that conceit, the cowardly anti-hero who accidentally becomes a hero, plays out exactly the same way in Woody Allen's film Love and Death.
Okay, right.
Which I had totally forgotten about, but it's the same thing, right? He's the he's but accidentally takes a fort or something, or
right.
And I remember really enjoying that being one of my favorite Woody Allen films back in the day when you were still allowed to like Woody Allen films.
Yes.
Right, yeah. But it's interesting and it also because it seems familiar to me as I was reading Flashman, even though I've never read Flashman before. That kind of idea of the accidental hero did seem familiar. And you mentioned Flashheart. There's a little bit of it in Blackadder as well, isn't there?
Yes.
Because Blackadder is very much a kind of cowardly, scheming figure.
Yes, you're right.
Series, where he's just a moron.
Yes, a bumbler. Yeah. But true. And I think, I don't think there's any question. It seems to have been on that kind of the cynicism, an influence on the cynicism of those later seasons of Blackadder.
I think so.
Yeah. Because in fact, that's the joke, is that the Lord Flashheart character is kind of.
Well, he is a hero, isn't he?
He is, yeah. I mean, like whether he's a hero or not, but like he's not afraid of danger. He's not a coward, I guess. Right? Like he's half mad, but he's not a coward. Right,
and he's definitely a womanizer as well.
Yes, yeah. Flashman is
Rick Mayall's Flashheart is actually, if Flash, it's kind of a bit like, because reading Flashman, you get to see Flashman from the interior, so you know how much of a coward. I'm wondering if Flashheart is how you would see him if you didn't know the truth.
Didn't know.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, what's interesting to me is the books. It's like the last one was published like relatively like late, like 2005 or something like that, I believe.
Right.
Like the last volume is. I'd be interested to know, are they as free with the racist, the later books as this one is? Because like there's not a lot of holding back on throwing the N word around, for example, right? And it was a reminder to me as well that word was much more broadly used in the British Empire, that it didn't just mean people from Africa or whatever, right? It was used for anyone who wasn't English almost.
Yes.
And like Flashman is egregiously racist, and this is a thing that comes through all of the books apparently. Like, I mean, one of the later books is literally called Flashman and the Redskins, right? And I think it just like, so I wonder how that flies now. I wonder, like, they're all still in print, and nobody's. I haven't heard anything, and it's not like it's validated. It's not like like his attitudes and the attitudes of the time are not necessarily shown to be acceptable or right.
Well,
but they are the attitudes of the time.
This is interesting because did you get a chance to listen to the Desert Island Discs?
No, but I do know he wasn't a big fan of political correctness. I know that.
No, I listened
to
the Desert Island Discs he did in 2001 or something like that, early 2000s, when he was living on the Isle of Man.
Okay.
And he's very clearly, as he's got older, he has, I don't know, kind of, I suppose this happens to a lot of people. You become the caricature of yourself, or because my guess would be when he was writing this first book, Flashman comes across as more, I don't know, in some ways he's I suppose there's the little bit where he's supposed to be a lovable rogue. So
he's mostly a scumbag, though. In this first book, he's really a piece of shit. Like, but numerous times you're like, wow.
But there's no doubting you are kind of rooting for him to get away, though, as well, right? Like, do you know what I mean?
Well, because he's your point of view character. He's telling you the story. So that, you're kind of co-opted into following his adventures.
And like you said, because he's surrounded by these kind of ineffectual kind of idiots as well, you almost feel like it's not as if everyone around him is exemplary apart from him. So it's almost like a survival mechanism. So I think you have a not sympathy exactly for him, but like you said, because he's the viewpoint character. It's interesting, isn't it? It's the kind of book I don't think you would write nowadays, just because of that conflict of interests it puts in your head, which is kind of what makes it interesting.
Yes, I agree, because as I said, you're right, there are moments where you could sympathize because his life is directly being put in danger by the absolute idiocy of, I mean, is it Lord Elphinstone, who was, again, it was a real person. When I started to dig even a little bit, I was like, wow, that incredible extended massacre of them attempting to kind of flee and escape to that Jalalabad or whatever place is through that Khyber Pass is all real. And if anything, when I started reading about it, it seems like it was even worse than it seems in the book. And it seems really bad in the book.
It's worth mentioning as well, that whole part, like we said, the rest of the book is fun to read and everything, but it's kind of I have to admit that last bit on the siege of Jalalabad part of the book is actually quite exciting.
Very intense.
Good adventure stuff. But getting back to the plus as well, he comes across as more amoral rather than he is immoral. Like he's in this racist kind of sexist, colonial, white man's burden world, and he's not
going to take full advantage. He's taking full advantage of whatever privileges he can get.
That doesn't make him sympathetic necessarily, but he is kind of like, well, this is the world I'm in, so I'm gonna get my jollies as much as I can. Like he hasn't created it, but he's not doing anything to make it any better. And he does indulge So there's like one bit when he's in India, he has him another one of his wenches, right, or whatever. Someone annoys him or something at some point. I went home and I gave her the beating of her life.
Yeah.
She loved it as well. Like it's like, wow. It's
there's a few, and I do think that apparently, like in the later books, some of that stuff is smoothed away a little bit. You know, my understanding is that he had some, that the author had some reservations about just what a piece of shit Flash is in this book, particularly I think like the rape scene that takes place with Nariman, the Afghani girl. I think that was a thing that, it makes him a pretty irredeemable piece of shit, and I think that is something that in the future books that never happens again. Apparently there's never another scene as kind of extreme as that. But that's, I mean, he does, but I mean, the thing is, like, he very nearly gets a comeuppance. There's almost a kind of an "I spit on your grave" moment, where she returns and is going to like neuter him, basically, right, and then it doesn't happen, and he kind of gets away. He gets away scot-free yet again, and it's one of the few moments where I wasn't as like, yeah, good for him. I was like, no, that would have been all right. But I'm wondering, I would have been fine with that.
In a way, the fact that they don't do that again is almost, you could argue, more problematic, because the whole idea here, I think, is the warts and all thing. And
oh yes, no, I agree. By trying to make him into an actual hero of some kind, or trying to,
that's almost worse in a way, right? Like at least these books, there's like a brutal honesty. Because I wouldn't want to speak for George McDonald, but the feeling I get, at least from these early books, is it's almost like, well, like it or not, these are your eminent Victorians, right? Like, like maybe slightly pumped up into the nth degree, but I get the feeling that, Flashman isn't necessarily supposed to be an outlier, right? Like, he's supposed to almost stand up for, name your Victorian hero of choice, right? Like, but yeah, he's not condemned. He's not outright condemned, even though he claims he hates Flashman, like in the Desert Island Discs interview, even though he does rail against political correctness. Even at that point, he says, no, he's a totally reprehensible character. So he doesn't like Flashman. But, yeah, he there's clearly an affinity that more for a way of life, or like he's clearly in some ways pining for days of empire. At least he is in the Desert Island Discs interview. Like, he blatantly comes out and says it. But he says it, even though he's unapologetic, the way he explains it, the way I read it, then I, again, might be projecting, but the way I read it is, regardless of whether this period of history is problematic or not, this is what I grew up hero worshipping. These kind of swashbuckling heroes. It's almost like it's so ingrained in me from when I was a kid. I can't help it. This is my idea of heroism, good or bad. And then he's gone into that. And to be fair, I mean, he could have just written the Flashman books without all that stuff in, right? He could.
Oh yeah, they could have been like like Sharp or whatever it is. That those Sean
exactly.
Which came later, I think. Which is fascinating to me, that somebody else was like, took Flashman and then like, no, I'm going to do it straight. Like, I'm going to not deconstruct it at all. I'm just going to present a heroic.
Right, and they're quite, what I've read of Sharp, they're actually quite readable and enjoyable as well, the Bernard Cornwell books. But yeah, so it's admirable in a way that he at least kind of acknowledged the rottenness at the core, even if he doesn't go so far as, I suppose nowadays, if you're going to write these books, you would have to go that step further. You'd have to have another point of view character, that a kind of Greek chorus or something to outright condemn it. And I think what's, for some people, problematic with these books, but for other readers, what's refreshing about these books is you get to make your own.
Yes. No, as I said, I was surprised by, and I suppose you bring your own biases as well.
Right.
to a certain degree. So if you want to see the empire as something that was worthy, I guess you can do that. But I bring biases that, as an Irishman, that say it wasn't a worthy endeavor, and so and that reading is there for me too. Like, I mean, like, because as you said, it is a very unvarnished view of the whole thing. It kind of, yeah, it allows you to kind of take what you want out of it, I guess.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of two films that have a kind of tone to them. The Man Who Would Be King, after the Rudyard Kipling short story.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No.
That's an amazing film, but it's very very colonial hero, and again the setting is Khyber Pass.
Okay.
And it's an adventure story where you are kind of rooting for the heroes, but the heroes are unapologetically kind of, slicing down local people left and right, and no one invited them there. They're on this, but it's it's very, because it's so well done, and you are rooting for these characters in this adventure. If you imagine it totally taken out of its context,
correct. Yes, devoid of all historical context and specificity.
And the other thing it reminded me in that regard is a film I really, really enjoy and I really get into, and I do think it's a great film. But again, the context is it's always there, and is the film Zulu.
Okay. Yes.
Because Zulu is
Zulu and Zulu Dawn were huge for me when I was a kid.
I've never seen Zulu Dawn, but Zulu is such a great adventure film. It's such a great action film. You can't help but get caught up. It is a well-made film. And I think that, especially for us, for our generation, even as a child, I remember it being problematic. Like, thinking, why
are these red coats?
Why are they there?
Why are they there? What's this all about?
Place, I get this. I get the hero. I get all that, and I get the the Zulus do their solidarity thing, like, we respect you for standing your ground, and none of it. I'm not saying any of it. I'm into it, but you can't get away from that.
Yes,
just that
historical context.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting because when they made Zulu Dawn, I think it was an attempt to, in some ways, explain away the context, or to kind of give more. So, because it's said before, it's the events that precipitate what happens in Zulu, right? Okay. It is the kind of the massacre that takes place of the Zulu tribes people that makes them.
Is it? So Zulu Dawn.
I remember loving both of them when I was a kid.
There's also
just the scenes. Is it in Zulu or Zulu Dawn where they all appear on the kind of the hilltop, like one by one, like surrounding all the Zulus? Kind of just, there's an incredible moment in one of the two films where they all sort of appear along the mountain ridge.
It might be the first Zulu.
Right.
Wasn't there a mini series as well, like Shaka Zulu or something?
Shaka Zulu, yes.
I don't know if that's considered. I don't know if that's related, or if it's just another Zulu story, But anyway,
but I would definitely draw on those connections too. When I was reading this, there was a part of me that was like, oh yeah, I can kind of those colonial adventures.
In some ways, that's problematic, right? Because those are two entirely different continents and different battles and different people.
Absolutely.
But in our mind, it's connected by the white man going in there, and so we shouldn't really be connecting them, but it is.
But it is. It's the British. It's still it's the British in both contexts, right? I mean, like, well, what is it with Afghanistan as well? Like, why? Like, it isn't like they call it the graveyard of empires, right? Because like one after another, the British, the Russians, the Americans, every empire seems to want to have a go at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Why? Like, I don't really understand why you wouldn't just leave the place alone. It's clearly not a place that invites you know, colonialism of any kind.
What's that mountain climbers thing? Because it's there.
It's there. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But yes, one of the things that, so, you know, when I was reading about the movie, apparently, I think part of the problem with the movie Royal Flash is that they should have just made the first book, which they had intended to. Apparently, Richard Lester had intended to adapt the first book and had done a bunch of pre-production work, and then it got, for one reason or another, the funding was pulled and it didn't happen, and then instead they made the second book.
Well,
and they
prior to that as well, the connection with Zulu, another connection with Zulu, is that originally it was Stanley Baker wanted to do a version of Flashman.
Okay.
And he would have been a pretty good Flashman as well, actually.
Yes, yeah.
I like me some Stanley Baker.
Yes, yeah.
Who was almost the first cinema James Bond, right, before Sean Connery.
Right.
He's the Idris Elba of his day.
Right. So yeah, so then you know, I think part of the problem with the like Royal Flash is that it's kind of, because it's a sort of a remake of Prisoner of Zenda, and there's other stuff going on. It's a much more scaled down and kind of in some ways a more silly kind of a story.
Have you read Prisoner of Zenda?
No. I'm just aware that it is.
Prisoner of Zenda, it's fascinating thing, because I suspect both you and me consider, because we are interested in films and literature, and we consider ourselves guys who have our pop culture antennae out to a certain extent. But it's interesting, Prisoner of Zenda is so ahead of our time that, I mean, we should know, really.
Yes, yes.
But until this put it into focus, and now I'm thinking, oh, I should probably at least try and read Prisoner of Zenda at some time. I don't know for you, but it just belonged to me, it was just I vaguely Prisoner of Birdman of Alcatraz, like Scarlet Pimpernel. It's just a
Count of Monte Cristo.
That pile of stuff that's about some, I don't know, some weird nebulous thing that makes sense in my head.
Right.
But in reality, probably it's not that at all, right? Much like Tom Brown's School Days is probably quite different from Billy Bunter.
Right.
You know.
The Bash Street Kids. But yeah, so I think that what the hell was I talking? Prisoner of Zenda. Yeah, so the movie. I think so. Richard Lester. Then when they came to make the movie, they did attempt to at least show at the beginning there is a piece from the first Flashman book. They show him kind of accidentally becoming the hero, and he's clasping the flag to himself. He's dead. He's trying to hand it over in surrender, and then it appears as though he's attempted to rescue the flag and protect it from the the Afghan tribes people. But yeah, because Richard Lester was like, I mean, he's the Three Musketeers, right?
Right. George McDonald Fraser also wrote this.
Again, those two movies I hugely loved as a kid.
I'm less so, but I think we'll get into this when we get into talking about the film. So before we get into talking about the film, just before we jump ahead to, because we both read about half of the sequel, Royal Flash. So before we kind of go into that, just to sum up a bit, what do you think of the first Flashman book? Like,
I found it entertaining. I found it very readable. I enjoyed the kind of I don't know, withering eye it kind of cast over the time period. And I think that, I mean, I like me some revisionist history. I like things, warts and all. So, I mean, I think he's not meant to be a hero, obviously, at all. And for that reason, I can forgive some of what I guess is in the book, because it makes no bones about the fact that he is a scumbag. He's a school bully, who's like, it's the later adventures of a school bully, basically.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Like one of the Ripping Yarns episodes as well has.
Yeah.
Thank you, school bully. for kicking the shit out of you. Yeah,
so yeah, no, I enjoy. In fact, I strongly suspect I will end up reading at least the next couple. I'm interested in the one where he goes to the US and somehow gets involved in the slave trade, which I think is the third one.
I mean, so this is my takeaway from it. Same as you, I enjoyed it on the level of this is a fast read, a kind of a rollicking adventure, and it's also got the extra spice of kind of the warts and all stuff. But I think the one thing that I was slightly let down by, and again, I don't know if this is because I haven't read the rest of the series, but Flashman has such a cult reputation. Like people love the Flashman series. Like, I mean, the number of times you will read when people talk about it online or whatever, it's, this is my favorite, historical fiction series, or Flashman's the best, or, oh, this is good, but read Flashman, So, and this first book, as fun as it was, and especially parts of it, like the Siege of Jalalabad and stuff, are good, but I didn't really feel, wow, that was great. And did you feel that?
No, I wasn't like transported, by the book. There was, but my understanding is that, I mean, that some of the later books are maybe better. I mean, he's working things out in this book, I think.
I guess.
It's his first book, right?
I'm halfway through Royal Flash as well. I feel as if Royal Flash isn't going to pay off in that way either. As kind of enjoyable, although not as enjoyable as the first one thus far. But from what I understand, it is considered one of the lesser books as well. So yes, like you, I am, but I don't know if I'm gonna go for I don't know if I have the stamina. I don't know if I'm gonna go for the whole run. Like I'm gonna go 3, 4, 5.
No, not a row.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think, or not like, I'll space them out over the next couple of years probably. But it's something I'll be happy to come back to.
Yes, I think I might be up for the challenge as well, even though a small part of me suspects that it's a bit, I get the gag, if you see what I mean. Like, I already get the joke, and I'm wondering how many times I want to hear the same joke again and again.
But maybe it's the fact that it's a different historical setting each time. As I said, the second book maybe is the least interesting because it's the least based in an actual real set of events, whereas my understanding is the one set in China is supposed to be very well observed what went on.
That's the one that interests me, because from what I understand as well, is it the Siege of the Summer Palace or something?
Yes,
is quite an obscure piece of history apparently. So it'll be interesting. If you mix it up with, if you're actually learning something. And
which I felt I was about in that last third of the book, that the stuff that was set in Afghanistan. I felt like I was learning things I didn't really know anything about, and then surprised to find out how much of it had really happened.
And from what I understand, the one that's considered supposed to be maybe the jewel in the crown of the series is the one that is set during the Crimean War and the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yes.
And somehow Flashman's flatulence
precipitates the charge.
Which does sound pretty good. So I think I might either jump ahead to that one or the China one, and then decide,
fill in the gaps. Which makes sense. I don't think that they have to be read in order. I mean, in fact, the second book already starts jumping. It establishes that some of the later books happen in the middle of that book, right? So
and there's also a few, as well as the 11 novels, there are some short stories as well, right? I believe, and
some of them I think there's some related books as well where Flashman kind of shows up in bit parts and stuff too. So
isn't there one about like the world of like underground boxing,
the Ajax or something?
That sounds kind of interesting. So I'm wondering if I might just wander off Flashman as well and check out another, because he's a good enough writer. And I could only imagine he got better, right? Like you said, this is the first
that
book,
was
so
the first book, yeah.
So Royal Flash, is is a kind of interesting story because Otto von Bismarck is in it as a character.
Yes, played by Oliver Reed.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so in the film version of the book Royal Flash, and we're both only about halfway through Royal Flash, so I don't think we have that much to say about it, other than it's I'll finish it, let's put it that way. But it does feel a little bit not redundant, but it
feels like thinner to me in some way.
Yes,
you know what I mean. It's not as
and the fact that they ripped off the story as well seems a little bit like treading water, doesn't it? Yeah. But yeah, so basically he Flashman is kind of conned into doubling for the Prince of Bavaria, or not Bavaria, was it? I wrote it down, Schleswig and Holstein, where some kind of contested day. And again, that's the one thing about the book that is quite interesting as well, is you get that slight flavor of the pre-unification Germanic map of Europe, which is fascinating. And I would recommend, actually, there's a BBC BBC radio series. I think it's called How to Invent ... or the Invention of ... And each mini series, like 3 or 4 episodes, is about the creation of a nation or a country. And the first 3 episodes they did is the invention of Germany. And they have 3 episodes on basically like the history of Germany and how it became unified, and and there's a whole episode about what was Saxony and what was Bavaria, and how different those people see each other, and how much more in common some parts of Germany having in common with Poland more than they do other parts of Germany. And it's really fascinating. I would recommend that.
Borders make no sense. They're so arbitrary. I mean, the whole of Eastern Europe's a mess as a result of
Poland must have whiplash from the identity politics, like whoa, but that's the for me, that's the stuff, as some of the stuff about Afghanistan was in the first book. This is the kind of rewarding historical detail in this book, and I suspect I will follow a lot of those footnotes. And check out that BBC series. That's a radio series. It's really
definitely.
So they made a film out of it, as directed by Richard Lester, with a screenplay by George McDonald Fraser. But he didn't like
some lines come directly from the book, which is a bit weird actually sometimes to hear. If you've just read a piece of dialogue and then you see an actor deliver it, it rings more false somehow than if I'd maybe just watched the movie first.
But that's our fault more than so famously, George McDonald Fraser didn't like the end result, which is why he didn't allow any other more films to be made.
I was wondering why there were no other.
Because you'd think it was a hot property, right? But so, and we have Malcolm McDowell,
who is a good choice, because in as much as he's so greasy and so unpleasant, and I think that may be one of the reasons why the film wasn't a success. And in fact, it apparently received it could almost be on that show hosted by those other 2 guys, that film Crack thing. You may have seen that. Anyway, it's an internet thing, but because this thing apparently was released and then kind of pulled from release, or given a very limited release, Royal Flash supposedly, and it was not a success. And I suspect one of the reasons being that Malcolm McDowell's portrayal is pretty accurate in some ways to the skeeviness and unpleasantness, and kind of like he's not played as a hero at all.
See, this is my problem with it, I think, is because because you're getting the inner monologue in the books, but you also, Flashman as a character doesn't make sense if everyone else doesn't idolize him, because it doesn't make sense. Because so the way he's portrayed by Malcolm McDowell, and I'm not having a go at it, but it's you have no reason. It doesn't ring true that people would think, oh, it's this hero of the Afghan war, because 5 minutes in his company you'd think, what a dick, what a weaselly.
Yes.
And he's not. He's not physically right. I don't think he's a bit too scrawny to be.
Okay.
And as much as I love the casting of Oliver Reed as Otto van Bismarck, like that works for me. In a way, it's a shame that they didn't have Oliver Reed as Flashman, because Oliver Reed for me fits the profile just from a physical. When I was reading the Flashman, the first book, I did think, Oliver Reed. Reed, because he's got that really caddish, roguish, impossibly handsome, very butch. Like Oliver Reed's really butch, right? Like he's got that manliness that I can imagine, being overpowered by him. I'm not gay, but I might just let him have his way with me just because it's Oliver Reed. So butch, right? He's just he can't help himself.
Okay. That beard scratching your neck.
Again, Idris Elba fits into that category again. He's probably let him have his way with me. So I think that the casting is a bit of a problem for me, but obviously for you, it's not. It's not.
No, I suppose because I've always associated Malcolm McDowell with kind of scumbaggery. So to me, it made a certain amount of sense.
He makes sense as Caligula to me. That's perfectly fine.
But not Flashman.
You need something with a bit more manly heft. Right? Malcolm McDowell, I love Malcolm McDowell, but I don't think I've never thought of him as like the paragon of maleness, right? Like But you only watched about half the film, right?
Yeah, so I haven't. Yeah, I don't know where it ultimately goes, and I haven't finished the book, so I don't know where that goes either. But
turns out he's a ghost at the end, and Bruce Willis.
Oh, okay,
he's a sled.
Unexpected. Okay.
But I have to admit, I didn't get on with the film. But
no, I'm not particularly enjoying it. My feeling is I'm likely going to finish the book and not finish the movie.
Comedy is a bit too, and I don't know how much you got into this because it changes about midway through. But about midway through, the comedy gets a lot more broad.
Oh, okay.
And it's it's just it doesn't work. Okay. But beyond that, I think my problems with it, and I think my problems with it are valid from an objective point of view, but also from a subjective point of view. What I realized for the first time actually watching this is, and you mentioned earlier liking the Musketeers films, which are contemporary. See, I never got on with swashbucklers for some reason.
Right, even as a little kid, it didn't.
Yeah, I don't know why. I kind of always like wanted to, but like the idea of them, but actually sat down with them, I was just like, my attention would wander. And something
too
about
much chandelier swinging and fencing.
Something about the other thing I noticed about this as well. The Victorian era for me is, I love me some Victorian proto science fiction. I love me some Victorian fantasy. I love me some extremely problematic Victorian views on race and sex and everything else. I like all that. I really like the Industrial Revolution and steam and all that stuff fascinates me. But when you put it on screen, the aesthetics of the Victorian era totally turned me off. The costumes, the hairstyles, the furniture, the wallpaper. Famously, Oscar Wilde as well is kind of But there's something about really ugly about Victorian aesthetics. Everything's a bit too much, and I don't know how you feel about it, but the Victorian aesthetics is the one thing that puts me off. So I think if I'm reading about anything Victorian, it's fine. But then if you put it in front of me, I'm like, that's ugly. I don't like that.
Okay. And I don't know if I have particularly strong feelings about Victorian.
It was an epiphany.
I mean, I get the busyness. I get the kind of, you know, it does seem overwrought, you know.
But it was an epiphany for me because I'd never thought about it before. It was just something that had always troubled me. And for some reason, watching Royal Flush, for some reason, I figured it out for the first time. I was like, oh yeah, it's just the it just looks horrible.
Right.
Other than that, it's fine. But that's very specific and personal to me, right? That's subjective. But
I think too, Richard Lester directed the scenes that were added to Superman 2, right? I mean, he's officially credited as the director of Superman 2, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that would be my big bone to pick with him. All the people eating ice creams and then getting blown into their faces. All of the really broad comedy that he brought. Because a little while ago, I think Richard Donner was able to finally kind of put together a kind of a composite print of what the movie had supposed. And it still wasn't perfect,
right?
But it was quite a bit less silly than Richard Lester's version.
Right. Again, this is one of those personal things.
I'm assuming you didn't see Superman 2 in the cinema when you were
again
7 or 8.
Another thing, for some reason, I feel like a traitor to my generation. The Swashbucklers didn't do it for me. Because I know when those Three Musketeers came on TV, most of the boys in the schoolyard were very excited. Oh, you know, the Musketeers. I didn't give a shit. And Superman as well, never. Star Wars didn't.
Yeah.
I'm just a weirdo.
You're a weirdo. Yeah.
However, I would say in Richard Lester's favor, I think my favorite Richard Lester film, and I think is a really good film, is Juggernaut.
I don't think I've seen Juggernaut. I'll write this down.
Juggernaut is his kind of his entry in the 70s disaster movie stakes.
Okay.
Where Richard Harris is the hero and someone tries to blow up like a cruise ship, but it's a very, very, very British disaster film. Disaster movie. Everything's miserable and cloud covered.
Okay, right.
Roy Kinnear is in it, who of course died on the Musketeers films, but when a stunt went wrong or something. But Roy Kinnear is just fucking great in it.
Okay.
He's like Butlin's kind of like, he's like the trying to be
yes,
the kind of master of ceremonies on the cruise ship, but everyone's just kind of miserable and it's wet and raining and cold. And it's fucking great. It's a British
that sounds awesome.
Film. Yeah.
The worst cup of tea I've drunk in my entire life was on a ferry from Wales to Ireland. And literally it looked like somebody had squeezed out like a dishcloth like of gray water, just like into a cup, and then I dropped the milk in and it went an even more sickly gray, and the milk had sort of separated. There was kind of chunks in it, and I was like what is it, like how could you serve that in a place where people care about tea, you know? I was my mind was blown. I will never forget that cup of tea.
Yes, on the one hand it's the perfect cross ferry trip drink, but on the other hand it's also sad, isn't it, because it's you know, it's nothing to do with it's nothing to do with England. It's the Irish Sea. We connect Ireland, Wales. You want something, you know, more rich, and you want some kind of thing to conjure up our Celtic heritage, but no, you've got this fucking thing to connect our our oppressed history instead.
Yes. Holyhead to wherever it was. I can't remember. The that ferry, Dunleary maybe. That's the that was the ferry. I did it a couple of times as a kid. But anyway, we should probably wrap up Flashman. As you said, I think I will come back to the books. You know, I'm not going to do them all in one go, but I definitely could see myself, and maybe like yourself, dip into some of the later ones that look more where the history looks really interesting because it may be something I don't know about, and then his caddish behavior just adds an extra level of entertainment to,
right,
to learning.
Yeah, no, same here. I'm thinking primarily the Crimean War because it is considered the best of the series, and the China one. I think that's probably where I'm heading next. Maybe next year or something. Give myself.
But you have to be careful about recommending them in a blanket kind of a way because because of the language, right? And I don't mean profanity, I just mean because of the amount of racist language and racist ideas, and not just that, but the misogyny as well, and the general, like, it's the whole Victorian, like, I'm surprised, does he beat any children? I mean, it almost seemed like it was the only thing missing was him giving a child a good beating as well. Or
we need a chimney sweep being kicked to death or something.
I did read something. I read quite a good kind of an impassioned defense of the books, on the grounds that basically certain forms of political correctness allow us to whitewash and not, because if we can't talk about these things at all, then they can go on. And they were saying that, in fact, the Victorian era is probably the prime example of this, when everything was so, you didn't speak of any of these things, but they were going on all the time at levels that were, really egregious, like whether it was sending children up chimneys or putting their fingers into machines that were ripping their arms off, or what's going on in India, or what's going on in Africa, what's going on with women. And so this kind of person was arguing that, like, by shutting down any discussion of these things, we actually allow them to flourish. It's better to have it all out in the open. But again,
I think the thing is, at the same time, though, in addressing some of those things and bringing them about, some people seem to, and I suppose you could argue in the case of Flashman as well, they do it with relish, so it peaks the needle the other way a little bit, like you're bringing it out of the open, but you have to be quite so enthusiastic about it. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because we recently did on another podcast that I do that hasn't been published yet, but we talked about that film Black Snake Moan. I don't know if you ever watched that, where Christina Ricci is a white trash nymphomaniac who ends up chained to a radiator by Samuel L. Jackson, who tries to tame her.
Wow. And when did this come out?
2006, and the poster is amazing. It's like an old 70s drive-in poster with a lily white woman on the end of a long chain and a big black dude standing behind her, and that's a kind of an example of a film that the poster in some ways doesn't do the film justice, because the film isn't as exploitational as that, but that is in there as well. And I think it's, as I talked about on that episode, it's to do with, well, you can be objective and kind of poke at this and look at it as a scientist, or but on the other hand, if you dance with the devil a little bit, and if you kind of get in there, in a way you're going to learn more, because there's no better way than to understand the mindset than to be, well, it's like the vaccine and the virus, right? Like, you need a little bit of it to
right. Yes.
But of course that's where there be dragons, right? That's problematic. And I can see why but I think Flashman, just to bring it around again, I think Flashman does ride
it's a balancing act. And I think it's a balancing act, and I think it mostly pulls it off.
Yes.
And I think for that reason, and I said, I like the fact that the book extends to you the opportunity to it's not didactic, right? It's kind of like it's like it paints a giant canvas, and you can kind of look at it and you can make your own judgments.
Yes, and I think just to link it a little bit as well, I think from that perspective, you could argue that's what Ibano was trying to do as well, except Ibano isn't quite as well written and is a bit more clunky, therefore it didn't come across sometimes. And I don't know if that's a translation thing, or maybe Alberto Vázquez Figueroa is clunky in Spanish as well. I don't know, but
Mhm.
I think it would be slightly unfair of us to praise one and not the other, because I think they're kind of going for a similar vibe and kind
Mhm.
of contemporaneous.
Mhm.
Sorry, I always have trouble with that word. And you know, so
Mhm.
do you see where I'm coming from with that a little bit?
I do. I suppose the major difference though is that in Urbano, we're still like our white characters are still presented in a they're much less um problematized than the way this book kind of really gets in and kind of there's like
Yeah,
who other than that, like maybe there's that one character who near the end of the book sort of takes up a Flashman who seems to be like a stupid but good-hearted English soldier, you know, the guy who
right.
the guy who finally realizes what Flashman is,
Yes,
right, and is like and is repulsed, and but
but
ultimately then dies and isn't able to tell anybody that
but
Flashman is.
even that, I mean, again, like you said, you bring whatever you bring yourself personally, but even that character as well is you do kind of slightly see him through Flashman's eyes and think
Oh yeah,
he's a bit of a buffoon. Like you
yeah,
are a
yeah. You know,
buffoon,
he's
right?
yeah. As I said, he's an idiot. There's no
Yeah,
question, and he's kind of a willing tool of the empire, right? It's not like he's a yeah, but you know, the kind of the book denies, and then you know, in a way, by presenting most of its you know non-English characters as kind of unknowable,
mm,
it somehow makes them we can at least extend to them like maybe some good intentions sometimes, like because we don't know,
right,
um,
right.
you know. Yeah, I don't know. So in that way, I feel like that's where Urbano, like, there's a lot of bad, you know, black characters and bad Arab characters, and then there's a couple of real
Right.
salt of the earth white guys trying to do their best to bring down the slave trade.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I feel like the third Flashman book, where I think Flashman gets involved on both sides, like he ends up involved in the slave trade and then ends up with the abolitionists as well, is probably more.
Yes. But probably
You know
just
what I mean?
because he had a stomach ache that day or something.
Yes.
But
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 Not because of any feeling for no,
right.
just whatever suited his best needs in that moment. Um.
Yeah. Anyway, we are rambling, and
Yes.
I have to go and beat my manservant because
Oh, excellent. Okay.
he,
Yes.
he
Yes.
dropped the sugar
Give him a
cube
good
on the
whack from me, please.
yes, he
Well,
dropped
I
the
should say,
sugar cube on the carpet, the cad. So I'm going to teach him some manners.
um,
Until
I
next.
have to say the only thing I was sad about when I looked through the whole list of Flashman books is there wasn't one about the Irish, because I really would have enjoyed Flashman beats the Bog Hoppers or something like that, like
Right.
a real kind of like anti-Irish. I think, yeah, just because I have a real soft spot for
Right.
those drawings of the Irish as gorillas exploding, you know, TNT things that were popular in Punch,
Right.
and so on, of the same era.
As
So
that barman in with Niall and I says, a crack at the Mickey.
exactly. Yes. So yeah, maybe I should write that. Man,
There you
has
go.
he died? Has
And
George
call
McDonald?
it
Yeah, he's gone, right?
yes, and call it a crack at the Mick. There's your
There we
title.
go.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Perfect.
Right.
Done. All right.
Until next time, literary as Feck. See you, Nick.
Uh, See you, Clive.
Right.